Good evening and welcome to Colorado Decides, a joint production of Colorado Public Television, CBS 4, KOA News Radio, and the Colorado Sun. I'm your host, Dominic Dezzutti. Thank you very much for joining us. Joining me is from the Denver Business Journal is Ed Sealover and radio talk show host on 630 KHOW, Ross Kaminsky. Tonight, we finish our look at the general election season with a debate featuring the major party candidates running for Secretary of State of Colorado. Joining us for the next 30 minutes are Wayne Williams, the Republican incumbent, and Jena Griswold, the Democratic challenger. Folks, thank you very much for being here. We have limited time, so let's get started. Ed, would you like to start with the first question?
Absolutely. Thank you all for being here today. I think we're going to talk a lot about your office and its duties with elections, which people tend to think of a lot. But I want to start with another way, because your office is funded 98% by business licensing fees. And so to that end, I want to ask you, what can you do as Secretary of State to make these as simple as possible for the businesses that fund your office and fund a lot of our economy? How do you balance that need to make it simple and affordable with having the resources you need for your office? Jena, why don't you start?
Well, I think the fees right now are pretty straightforward. That's something that I think Wayne did a very good job on. But you really hit the nail on the head. We do need further funding. And one of the things that I plan to do is fight for federal funds, especially on the election side. And unfortunately, we're in an atmosphere where Republicans in the Senate, Republicans in the House, and the White House itself have all killed bills that would provide resources to state elections. I disagree with that, and unfortunately, something that's a big distinction between me and Wayne is that Wayne decided to fight against DHS resources after our elections were targeted by Russian cyber attack in 2016. Now, he did use the resources. They were, the program was moved forward, but I'll take a different attitude. I'll fight for federal resources. If it's from DHS, I'll say, hey, we're a swing state. Double everything that you can do. And I'll go to Congress and say, look, the state of our elections is one of our biggest national security risks across the nation, and we have to be taking it seriously. So that's what I plan to do. I plan to fight for Colorado.
Wayne?
Let me answer the question that actually was asked and talk about what we do on the business side. As Colorado Secretary of State, I've worked to make it easier than ever before for businesses to file. We became the first state of the nation that allowed companies to get a free certificate of good standing online. We've rolled out more of our area on the nonprofit side, which also is part of what we do. We just got the 2018 Nonprofit Impact Award from the Colorado Nonprofit Association. So we've worked to make things easy. We also answer the phone when people have questions. My favorite response, my favorite letter I've gotten from the San Luis Valley Animal Welfare Group, saying that when we call your office, they are, and this is the quote, invariably helpful and cheerful. There's not every government that gets comments like that, and I'm proud of the fact that we actually are responsive to our business and nonprofit filers as well as on the election side. I also worked with Governor John Hickenlooper to roll out mybiz.colorado.gov. This is a one-stop shop that allows new businesses to be filed easily, not just with things in my office, but also interacting with other parts of state government, the Department of Labor and Employment, Department of Revenue. And so it provides a seamless way for a new business to be started. And I think that's part of what we try to do in the Secretary of State's office is be responsive, provide the services that businesses need. I have a business advisory council that tells me you need to do this, or this is what we think you should next work on developing in your office. So we listen to that input and we do things that make it better, all doing that with $10 a year, the lowest renewal fee in the nation.
And quickly, could you address Jena's assertion that you turned down federal government money?
Didn't turn it down. In fact, Congress just allocated $6.3 million to Colorado as part of the second part of the HAVA funds. I actually worked getting unanimous approval from the state legislature to provide the match that Colorado needed. We needed a 5% match for those funds. We were able to do that and got unanimous bipartisan approval, something that my office has worked very well in working with both Democrats and Republicans in the legislature, and also signed by Governor Hickenlooper. We've then implemented those processes already by having the nation's first county level election preparedness exercise for clerks across the state, with people coming from the New Mexico Secretary of State, New Jersey Secretary of State, others to see what we were doing right here in Colorado.
To clarify, I didn't say he turned down the resources. I said he fought against resources. So after 21 states were targeted by Russian cyber attack, the Obama administration in its last month wanted to extend the critical infrastructure program to elections. That program's been around for quite some time. It's the program that all our critical infrastructure is grouped into. So participants include the nuclear sector, the banking sector, the electrical grid. It goes on and on and on. After our elections were targeted, the Obama administration wanted to extend that program to elections. Wayne sent a letter and said, oh, no, we are very worried about federal overreach. Look, this program works the same way across all sectors, and what it does is provide penetration testing and risk assessment to the sectors that are included. That's something that we do need in Colorado. Wayne has taken part of that program because the program was extended to elections, even though he fought against it. But I think it really marks leadership. Look, whether it's President Obama or President Trump, if any White House wants to give us further resources to secure our elections, I'm going to say yes.
Let's be clear on that if we could. That was not actually the context of what was going on at the time. Homeland Security said, we want to visit with you, we want to discuss this possibility, and then without having that discussion with the Secretaries of State, they unilaterally did it. That's provoked both Democrats and Republicans as Secretary of State to say, hey, wait a second, you promised this process, it didn't occur, we're concerned about that. Since then, Colorado has then worked with it. I and other people from my office have served on the national leadership for the coordinating council, but it was the process without public input that we were concerned about, and that's why the National Association of Secretaries of State, both Democrats and Republicans, said we think it was not done in the appropriate way.
If a program is good enough for our nuclear grid, it's good enough for our elections.
Let's keep rolling. Ross, let's get you involved here with the question.
Yes, so obviously we're several days away from an election, and so I'm thinking a lot about voting. And Colorado has had more and larger changes to how we vote in recent years than most states. So I'd like you both to answer the same question. I'll start with Wayne. If you could change unilaterally, without having to get permission from anybody else, if you could change one thing about the way Colorado votes right now, what would that be and why?
So if I could change unilaterally one thing, it would be fixing the conflict in the Constitution between recall elections and the way elections actually work today. The reason that seems like a fairly small ask is because I've worked to get the other things done through the legislature. During the time I've been Secretary of State, we've come forward with 29 bills. 25 of those have been enacted. I implemented automatic voter registration so that when you get your driver's license, we automatically are able to get you registered to vote and update your registration if needed. That last little bit was one of those 25 bills that was passed by the legislature, that update part. So we've worked to make the system work better than ever before in Colorado. It's why we lead the nation in both voter registration and in voter turnout, as well as being the safest state to vote.
Can you elaborate on the recall aspect that
Sure.
keeps you up at night?
So Colorado Constitution for recall was written in the early 1900s. It contemplates a polling place election in which people go to polling places for ballots that have been prepared. So when you run a recall, as happened to me when I was county clerk, and as when I was hired by the Democrats in the San Luis Valley to run a recall election for them, you don't always know who the candidates are going to be until a few days before the election. In fact, for the recall election in 2013 of the former Senate president, we found out Wednesday morning at 12:01 a.m. who was going to be on the ballot for an election taking place on Tuesday. Well, Colorado law contemplates you're going to mail ballots 22 days ahead of time. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out you can't mail a ballot 22 days ahead of time if you don't even know who's on it until about 6 days ahead of time. So that's one of the conflicts. We need to modernize that process. That requires a constitutional amendment. We're working on a smaller scale constitutional amendment. It's Amendment W this time that allows the consolidation of the judicial retention question. The plan is to work with a bipartisan group of legislators to hopefully get that reform on the ballot during the next administration.
Thanks. And Jena, same question for you. If you could change one thing about our voting system, what would it be and why?
Well, I fundamentally believe the Secretary of State should be making it easier for eligible people to vote. Whether you're Republican, Democrat, Independent, from rural Colorado, from big cities, your voice should be heard if you choose to vote. First thing that I would like to do is fix our statewide voter registration system. We now have a universal mail-in ballot state. By the way, Wayne tends to take credit for our high participation rates, but he fought tooth and nail against the very measures that got us there: universal mail-in ballot, same-day voter registration. But anyhow, we have a universal mail-in ballot state. For that to work, for a person to be able to either mail in their ballot or actually still go vote in person if they, dog ate their ballot, we need a real-time poll book, and that's our statewide voter registration system. In Colorado, when that system goes down, we see 2 to 3 hour lines in some polling locations. The system has gone down on Election Day, 2010, 2014, 2016. One of my major priorities is making sure that that system works, because whether you're voting in person or whether you're doing a mail-in ballot, the system has to work for everybody, and we don't want people waiting in 2 to 3 hour lines.
Ed, it's your turn. Let's get involved.
All right, I'd like to ask you about the operations of the current office. I want to ask you different questions for each of you. Jen, I want to go first here. You mentioned that business licensing fees are kind of where you'd like them to be. Wayne also has started a one-stop shop for businesses to find information. He has run what the Washington Post called the safest voting system in the country. He's even reached out to try to get more imprisoned voters to vote. What is it about his record that made you look at him and say, this guy needs to be replaced?
So you've hit a lot of things that I'd like to improve on, but I announced my candidacy right when Wayne sent all of our voter data to Trump's voter commission last July of 2017. After Trump was elected, he formed a voter commission. It was being ran by someone with a long and ugly history of disenfranchising hundreds of thousands of people. There were lawsuits instantaneously filed for federal overreach, and there was no guarantee that our voter data would be stored in a secure server. Wayne, without even having that guarantee and seeing all the lawsuits, didn't file an injunction, didn't say, hey, this is a bad idea right off the bat. He said it was good that the Trump administration was collecting information, sent all of our voter data to DC, and it caused thousands of Coloradans to cancel their voter registration. Thousands. The November after that, we had a city council race decided by pulling a name out of a hat because it was a tie. And there's thousands of people off the voter rolls. I believe the Secretary of State should make it easy for eligible people to vote. That includes protecting our rights, our privacy rights. And what I would have done is filed an injunction and said, look, there's all these red flags. Arguably, this federal request is not even legal. We have Colorado law, of course, that allows the public to request some public information. But the federal government isn't a third party. It's a federal government, and we live in a federalism. There's the Constitution. There's the 10th Amendment. There's federal law, all of which may be in breach. So I would have put the brakes on to that and really stood up for Coloradans. In terms of the business side and the election side, I think there's a lot that we have to do. I do think Wayne took major steps forward in creating My Biz Colorado, but I think there's more that we can do to streamline starting a business in Colorado. I grew up very working class. I started my own business. First person in my family to go to four-year college, to law school, first person in my family to start a business. And what I know is that people don't know what they don't know. So say you're a small business owner, you just started your business for the first time. You may eventually decide, okay, I want to start LLC. I want some type of legal entity. And you find your way to the Secretary of State's page, and it's pretty easy to register that LLC. You may not know that there's unemployment insurance, workman's comp. Depending on where you live in the state, you might have to file additional filings. And Wayne has put all that process together in a separate website. I think it has to be right where you register your business, because you may not know that you need to search for a separate website to open up your business. You need it right where you register your LLC. And I want to take a step further and say, hey, small business owner, hey, entrepreneur, we have all these great resources in Colorado. So they're right, so I want to put that right where you open your LLC so folks know right off the bat what they need to do and where's help if the time gets tough for them.
Great, thank you. And Wayne just went through a long list of things you've done well, but in the 2016 election, you also turned down a number of candidate petitions, particularly at the U.S. Senate race. You got sued by all of them. You lost most of them. Why should voters not be concerned there could be limit to ballot access if you continue as Secretary of State?
Sure. Let me briefly address the last point raised by Jena, which is, first, she said several things that were not true, but let me just hit a couple of them. There was no private data that was sent. The only data that was sent was the publicly available information. We excluded from that all Social Security numbers, all dates of birth, all driver's license numbers, so any private information was not included. It's the same public information that every entity can get. And yes, everyone's entitled to that. And we provide it to the Democratic Party despite the fact that their servers have been hacked. But that's the law in Colorado. And to have a Secretary of State say, I don't want to be fair, I don't want to be even-handed, I only want to give it to my friends and allies is dangerous. Let me talk about the ballot access questions. So Colorado has a two-step process. One of those is that the Secretary of State, under existing law and the court decisions, is required to follow the law strictly. In fact, the court decisions in those very cases you cite said, the Colorado Secretary of State followed the law the way they were supposed to, and they don't have the flexibility to change that. But I, as the judge, can use a different standard. I can use a substantial compliance standard, and that's how some of the individuals obtained the ballot. They didn't meet the technical requirements, but they met the broader substantial compliance to the court, but I cannot apply. And what I did after that is I went to the legislature and said, you know, can you give me some of this flexibility? Can you let me allow a candidate to cure a deficient affidavit, for example? And the legislature agreed. And we got it through the legislature, signed by the governor, so passed Democratic House, Republican Senate, Democratic governor signed it. And we were able to expand that process so that when someone has a technical paperwork error, that we're able to say, hey, candidate, you goofed up, would you please fix that? And we were able to give them the chance to do just that. One of the other issues that arose in that election were some fraudulent signatures. So again, we went to the legislature and said, would you give us the ability to check signatures on candidate petitions? The legislature agreed. We implemented it this cycle, and it worked very well. Again, with a cure process, just like with a ballot. And so where we've seen issues, we've addressed those, and we've worked with a bipartisan legislature to get that done.
Let's keep going. Ross, you're up next for questions.
Yeah, I think we keep coming back to ideas where your office would have opinions, and then you have to talk to the legislature to get these things done. And one that's been a long time of personal interest to me is campaign finance limits here in Colorado. For example, in the governor's race, a candidate can only raise $1,150 between the general election, the primary and the general election combined. If the legislature were to come to you and ask you your opinion on whether and how our campaign finance limits should be changed, what would you say? I guess I'll start with Wayne, since I started with Jena last time.
So I think there's a couple things I would say. First, this is a constitutional requirement, so it can't be done via statute or rule in my office. It needs to be done through referral to a constitutional amendment. And so the first question would be, is there interest in pursuing that? Because a constitutional amendment is a complicated process. The legislature can refer up to 6 per cycle. This year they referred all 6. But is this something that you want to make a priority and actually work to get done? So that would be the first question I would ask. The second thing that I would look at, some of our the legislative limit, for example, at 400, has not changed because of the way the amendment was worded, despite significant inflation cumulatively over that period, because it only looks at the inflation for a 2-year period and then makes an adjustment. So that's not changed. The result of that is that you wind up with a lot of money, particularly in some of these Senate seats that are in contention, being spent by outside parties, as opposed to the actual candidate who's more responsible for the message and less likely to go negative, and more likely to talk about the positive things they would do. So I think you need to have that discussion about what is the right limit, and I think part of that is surveying surrounding states to see what they use for their limits and to see what works. And I think those are some of the questions that I would have with the legislators who are interested in pursuing it.
So just give me a yes or no answer to this. Is your gut instinct that you would support increasing the limits in the state of Colorado?
In some circumstances, yes.
Jena, same question for you. What's your opinion about Colorado's campaign finance limits, and would you change them, and if so, how?
Well, I think money in politics is crippling our nation and crippling our democracy, how it's currently working. Look, I grew up going to food banks. My mom worked 2 jobs. I started working the summer after 7th grade. I'm not the typical type of candidate. And I think we have 2 major problems, and I will answer your question. The answer is yes. I think we should increase limits. The question is where. But even if we increase limits, it's not going to fix the problem. Like Wayne said, it's good when a candidate can control their message, but we have all this soft side spending, so big groups coming in and just dumping in money to races. So you don't even know what the candidate stands for. I think that's a real problem. So I would like to see candidates get more control, but then we have 2 other issues. The first one is the Citizens United unlimited money in politics. I'll advocate against Citizens United. I think it allows special interests and billionaires, not rich people, the billionaire class, to have way too much influence in our elections, and I think it's problematic. But what we can specifically do, and one of the major reasons I'm running for Secretary of State, is to pursue campaign finance reform. I believe that political spending should be transparent. So Coloradans, when we're in a democracy, the people who vote should know who's trying to influence their vote and how they're trying to do it. And we have dark money loopholes right now in Colorado. So yes, I'd like to work with the legislature to make sure that limits make sense so a candidate can control her message, but also make sure that political spending is transparent. But aside from just working with the legislature, look, I think there's a lack of auditing of campaign finance filings right now happening in the Secretary of State's office. The Secretary of State is the person statewide elected that oversees our campaign finance system. I want to get eyes on those documents, on those filings, so that we know that there's no quid pro quo going on. So we know that corporate money's not coming in. So we know foreign nationals aren't putting money into our campaigns. And then I want to enforce the laws. So I'd like to amplify the laws, to increase transparency, and enforce the laws on the books.
And I would just, quick response to Wayne, if you look one state to our left of Utah, you'll find a state where there are no campaign contribution limits. I hope we look that way.
So let me talk about one enforcement issue. As you may be aware, the federal court struck down Colorado's campaign enforcement plan that's set up in the Constitution. Rather than sit back and do nothing, I instead worked with both the Republican and the Democratic Party to adopt new standards that provide for quicker results, faster transparency, and without the need to be a lawyer to prosecute your own case, supported by both the Democrat and Republican Party. One of the legislative changes we'll be pursuing is enshrining that in legislation this next year.
Wayne also fought against transparency measures in 2017, 2 of which I would support to make political spending more transparent. And then I want to go beyond the legislation that was proposed in 2017 to make sure that when we have independent expenditure spending, that we see real people behind that spending.
We only have a minute left before our closing statements. Half an hour goes by pretty fast in the studio. I'm going to ask a quick question. Ask for about a 20 to 30 second answer. Jen, I'll start with you. Because this position, Secretary of State, oversees elections, is it important for the Secretary of State to be as nonpartisan as possible? Your short answer.
In overseeing elections, yes. And I'm running because I believe that every eligible American, whether you're Green Party, Republican, Independent, wherever you are, your voice should be heard. So yes, I believe the Secretary of State's goal should make it easier for eligible people to vote. And that's what I intend to do as Secretary of State.
Absolutely, that's what I've done. That's why the majority of county clerks who are Democrats who've endorsed in this race have endorsed me. It's why all 7 daily newspapers that have endorsed me, because I've run this office in a nonpartisan and fair way.
Thank you very much for your short questions. As I previewed, it is time for our closing statements. We ask our candidates to offer a 1-minute closing statement. We flip a coin before the debate to determine the order. Jenna will be doing the very first the closing statement. Jenna, your 1-minute closing statement, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you for having me here. Thank you, viewers, for tuning in. I'm the Democratic nominee for Secretary of State. My name's Jena Griswold, and I would be honored to have your support. I'm fundamentally running because I think there's a lot of work left to be done in the office. I'd like to make it easier for eligible people to vote by expanding automatic voter registration and fixing our statewide voter registration system, because we don't want people to wait in 2 to 3 hour lines. I believe in transparency, and I'll pursue campaign finance reform so that we stop secret political spending in state races. And look, I'm not the typical type of candidate, but I think this election comes down to leadership and to ethics. My opponent has opposed the very measures that has led to high participation rates in our democracy. He's fought against same-day voter registration, fought against transparency measures. And there's an ethical issue. He has a second job. He's been representing private clients before state bodies. They're not disclosed, but on top of that, he's paid for his bar fees with state funds to represent private clients and has spent $3,000 on buying himself boots, a cowboy hat, a jacket, shirts, pants, and $70 worth of socks. I won't do that as Secretary of State. I'll be a full-time Secretary of State and take the job extremely seriously. Thank you.
Thank you, Jenna. Wayne, 1 minute, floor is yours.
Thank you for joining us here today. My name is Wayne Williams. I'm the Republican candidate for Secretary of State, but I also have the honor of being supported by many Democrats across the state, including the majority of county clerks. I ask for your support so that I can continue the work that I've done in the office and that we've implemented reaching across bipartisan legislative initiatives. And folks, here's the reality. We have the lowest business fees in America. We've added 110,000 new businesses. We have the highest percentage of registered voters. We have the highest voter turnout in America. And as the Washington Post and Fox News, two people that don't usually agree, said we are the safest state in America in which to vote. That's the record I'm running on, and I'm honored and appreciative of your support. We've made it easy to vote, and as I explained in 2014, yes, I do have another job. It grounds me in the real world. I said that when I ran in an election 4 years ago that my opponent didn't even bother to vote in. Please consider, as you choose your next chief election official, you want someone who actually votes themselves.
Well, that is all the time we have for our debate featuring major party candidates running for Secretary of State of Colorado. I'd like to thank our candidates, Wayne Williams and Jena Griswold. I also thank my fellow panelists, Ed Seelover and Ross Kaminsky. If you'd like to find out any information about this year's general election issues and races, please visit our websites. There's a few of them: cpt12.org, cbsdenver.com, koanewsradio.com, and coloradosun.com. Be sure to stay tuned for the championship round of our Both Sides of the Story High School Debate Tournament. Tonight, students from Cherry Creek and Mountain Vista High Schools debate if undocumented students should receive in-state tuition at Colorado universities. You will not want to miss it. And finally, I want to thank you for tuning in for our debates this season. Through your support of CPT 12, we produced 22 debates this year. We're proud to serve our community, but we know we are only able to do it with your support. So thank you for making it happen. For everyone here at Colorado Public Television, I'm Dominic Dezzutti. Thank you very much for watching. Good night.